Hi, and welcome to In Search of Insight, Nootropics Depot's monthly podcast. I'm your podcast host, Erica, and sitting next to me is our product specialist at Nootropics Depot, Emil.
Hey everyone.
This month, Emil and I are going to be telling you about Berberine. This is a supplement that we've carried for years. We carry a couple different types and brands of Berberine, but the main benefit of this supplement is how it helps us metabolize glucose that we get from our diets. So this is going to have benefits for maintaining a sense of fullness, as well as helping us to manage our hunger throughout the day. And we have some really exciting research to share with you this month. So we're going to explore the 3 different Berberine products that we carry with Nootropics Depot, and we're also going to talk about the science behind how Berberine works.
And that's pretty much the whole 30-second elevator pitch that was recently requested on some comments. But to add a little bit to that, we'll be talking about GLP1, glucagon-like peptide 1. This is all the rage right now, and Berberine has an effect on it, so definitely watch if you're interested in that effect. We'll also be talking a lot about glucose metabolism, where GLP1 plays a role, and gut health, which is also related to the GLP1 functions, the overall glucose metabolism functions, and then, of course, like Erica said, we'll be looking at some neurotransmitter systems. Norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, and sigma-1 in particular, and then also looking at some neurogenesis pathways associated with Berberine. So all in all, it's going to be a pretty jam-packed episode. In this hour, we're going to fit a ton of information in. So if you really want to learn about Berberine, this is a good episode to check out. And Berberine, I don't always have my ear very close to the ground when it comes to trends on TikTok, because I'm not personally on TikTok. I'd rather not give all of my information away. But there is a big surge of Berberine on TikTok, and it's become very popular there. And it's also becoming popular more on YouTube. You see a lot of YouTube videos being made about it. There's a lot of people and influencers talk about it. So we thought we would also take the opportunity and jump on the bandwagon a little bit to give a bit of our look on the situation, because Berberine is a very cool supplement, and we've been selling it basically since we started the company because we like it ourselves. So it's great to see that it's surging in popularity, but because of that, we also want to make sure to stay ahead of it, to participate in the trends, because it's always important to keep moving along with where the industry is going. And apparently people really like Berberine, which is not surprising given how popular GLP1 agonists have become, and how expensive those are, and how side effect ridden those are. And Berberine maybe offers a nice solution that kind of goes away from that and helps with maintaining a healthy weight.
So we've talked a lot recently in the past couple of months about glucose metabolism, because our last podcast was about black ginger, which also has effects on glucose metabolism. And we've also talked about how cyanidin 3-glucoside can help us process glucose and the nutrients we get from our diet. But this is really a nice culmination point after we've talked a little bit about these effects from other supplements, because Berberine's main function, as far as what people are interested in, is how it affects our glucose and our hunger, and basically managing our weight. This can be a bit of a touchy subject, but we're really going to be talking about the science behind how glucose metabolism works. And we're curious to see if anyone has tried some of these Berberine products before, what your thoughts are, experiences have been. As always, you can check us out on Reddit, and our subreddit is going to be r/Nootropics Depot. That's where all the conversations are happening at all hours of the day about Nootropics Depot supplements, new supplements on the market, and giving advice for these kind of concerns, whether it is fitness or diet improvement or managing hunger and these kinds of issues and topics that you guys might be interested in. So definitely go check us out on Reddit. And now let's get into the Nootropics Depot perspective on Berberine.
And as Erica said, weight loss somehow is a bit of a touchy subject. I understand somewhat. I will not be participating in that. So if you are easily offended about talks about weight, maybe this is not the podcast for you. But we'll be talking about maintaining a healthy weight. And in my opinion, especially what we see in the US with 70% of the population being overweight, that's a huge problem, especially with 30% being obese. I think that's an even bigger problem. I don't really care in this podcast about the social effects that has, more about the health benefits, the overall scientific look on being at an appropriate weight.
And there's another element of this too, which is that glucose metabolism isn't only affecting the way that you look and your body composition, but it really affects the way that you feel, energy levels, and mood as well. So we're going to talk about that too.
And also when it comes to optimizing hormones, for example, if you want to have high levels of testosterone, you actually also need low levels of body fat. Because, for example, visceral adipose tissue, the kind of fat mass that is on your belly, we need some of it, but if you have a lot of it, visceral adipose tissue is very rich in the aromatase enzyme. So if your whole strategy is about enhancing testosterone production with supplements like Tongkat Ali, you would also really benefit from having a supplement in your regimen that's going to help you lose some visceral adipose tissue. You can do that with something like Sanidin 3 glucoside, which we already did a podcast episode about, black ginger, but then also berberine plays a really important role here. And if you're decreasing that visceral adipose tissue, you're decreasing overall aromatase enzyme activity, which means you're keeping more of that testosterone around and not turning it into estrogen. So there's a lot of benefits associated with dropping your weight a little bit. I think a lot of us are kind of right at the edge of the BMI. You might look at me if you see me on the street and think I'm at a perfectly healthy weight, which is somewhat true, but I'm really at the edge of my BMI. So for me, it's also something I've been paying a lot of attention to recently with C3G coming out and black ginger and berberine always being there, is how can I make sure to have as little visceral adipose tissue, white adipose tissue, as much brown tissue, brown fat tissue as possible, and to stay lean, healthy. And through that strategy, I've felt improvements in mood, energy levels, I'm recovering better from exercise, I am exercising more. So there's a lot of benefits to explore here, and I think there is a reason why those GLP-1 agonists are so popular right now, and it's because a lot of people actually want to lose weight, but it can be hard to lose weight. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is the case. Like we normally do, though, we'll also do that under the slight influence of one of these compounds. We have two versions. So we have the Silymarin and berberine. This is just a milk thistle extract combined with berberine hydrochloride extracted from Berberis aristata. And then what Erica has is made by Indenia. It's a phytosome, so it's kind of like a more complex liposome if you're familiar with those. It encapsulates the berberine with a few other components there, for example pea protein, which can help it absorb a little bit better, and grapeseed oil, which can help the effects in your GI system, which we'll touch on a little bit later, because this also has a lot of effects on the GI system and overall gut health. The one Erica is holding, you can kind of take one dose and it affects the whole day, because the phytosomes almost act as a extended release mechanism. The berberine is not all there to be released instantly. This also makes it more tolerable in terms of the gastrointestinal system, if that's something you're sensitive to, which some people are, and it makes it that it lasts a lot longer. However, phytosomes also take a little bit longer to kick in, and because we're keeping these episodes a little bit shorter, we're going to be taking the normal berberine, because that's going to kick in a little bit faster. To spice things up a little bit too, we have already taken a dose about 2 hours ago. We had lunch, a very small lunch, and right before we had that very small lunch, we took some berberine, so about 20-30 minutes before, and then we ate the lunch to see if from a much smaller lunch we could feel as satiated as we normally would, and yeah, I'm feeling pretty satiated.
I feel pretty good too. Just for anyone who's curious, we had chicken kimchi dumplings, super tasty, but as I was listening to Emil cooking them downstairs, I was thinking, okay, here come the dumplings. I could really go for some rice alongside it. That would really like round out the meal. But then, I thought, nah, it's fine. We're just going to keep the flow going. We've got things to do. The rice is going to take some time. I'm sure it'll be fine. We had, I think, 5 or 6 dumplings each, right? Mm-hmm. And normally that's about like half of a lunch portion for us, where we tend to eat a fair amount of calories on a daily basis. We're pretty active, but I feel good.
Yeah, I feel really good too. I feel quite focused, and that could be coming from some of the neurotransmitter effects. For example, berberine seems to enhance norepinephrine levels. And norepinephrine is a bit of a stimulating neurotransmitter. It enhances mood, it also enhances focus, it enhances energy levels a bit, and it also enhances, berberine enhances dopamine levels and also serotonin levels. So there's definitely some mood boosting going on there with those three neurotransmitters. And then it also activates the sigma-1 receptor, which is a bit of a strange receptor that we don't really know enough about yet scientifically. However, the sigma-1 receptor, when you activate it, produces a mood boosting and nootropic effect, and I think we're both noticing that a little bit.
I do, for sure. I didn't take my regular stack today because I've got other things to do, and I decided, hey, I like the effects of the berberine and also a new magnesium product that by the time this podcast is out has been revealed already.
So we can say it. It's going to be magnesium pedolate, which is the pyroglutamic acid salt of magnesium. And if you've been around for a while, you've seen pyroglutamic acid already make its debut in our alcohol defense formulation. Then we released it as a standalone, and now it's in this cool magnesium form. And complexing the pyroglutamic acid with the magnesium makes it absorb better, but also produces unique nootropic effects. However, that's a topic for a different video. The new product release video, which will also be coming out pretty soon.
Yes. So if you haven't seen that yet, definitely go check it out because there are 5 exciting new products that we go in depth on. But to get back to what we were saying before, what I've currently taken today was 1 dose of Berberine Silymarin and 1 dose of this new magnesium product, and that's it. Not my normal stack. So I'm interested to see what the effects of another dose of berberine is going to be, because I have a little bit more of a blank canvas today.
Yes. And I do have to say, after about 2 hours, I'm getting a little bit hungry. So let's see if the hunger suppression, the appetite suppression effect is noticeable from this dose too in the time where we finish this podcast.
Yeah.
Which might not be the case because it did take a while for it to kick in. After we took it half an hour before eating, and then we ate, and I would say an hour after eating, I started feeling kind of the nootropic effects. Now, keep in mind, we haven't taken berberine in a very long time, so it's not like it has been built up in our system. So our first dose of it in at least a year, I think, was today, 2 hours ago. So here's our second dose. And that brings me to dosing frequency for the normal berberine. With this one, you could take 1 to 2 doses, the Phytosome. 1 to 2 doses is going to last you all day. The normal berberine isn't going to last that long, and you actually want to take slightly higher doses of it. Berberine doesn't have the best bioavailability. We'll talk about why that might not matter as much a little bit later. But for certain things, it does matter. So the Phytosome is a great choice. With this one, you have to take a slightly higher dose to overcome that limit in bioavailability. But I think that has some benefits in terms of gut health, which we'll talk about later. But you could take 3 of these a day. Basically, right before you have breakfast, right before you have lunch, and right before you have dinner. Then every time when you eat a meal and you process a meal, you can process it a little bit better. And I think this is a great starting point to talk about GLP1.
Yes.
So GLP1, when we eat, it gets released. It's a peptide, and then it acts on the GLP1 receptor. And when GLP1 activates the GLP1 receptor, we have a bit of an effect of satiety. We feel full from it. So, and we have a lot of these type of hormones throughout our body. When we eat fats, when we eat proteins, when we eat carbohydrates, all of these different hormone systems get activated, and that makes us feel full and makes us stop eating. Now, this is where the first problem arises with weight gain. Not everyone responds well to those signals, or not everyone produces those signals at the same intensity. So, for Erica and I, we might eat a sandwich or some dumplings, and we're full. For someone who doesn't have as responsive of a hormone system there for those satiety hormones, they might keep eating. They might eat a sandwich, and then they might have a glass of soda and a dessert, and doing that every meal really builds up the calories. And it also depends what you eat, of course. So if you eat things that are very dense, and readily soluble, for example, just straight sugar from a soda, you're going to absorb it really quickly, and it's not going to stretch your stomach out. And that stretching of your stomach also adds to the feeling of fullness, because when your stomach senses stretching, it also releases hormones that basically tell you to stop eating. So, for example, if you eat a bunch of leafy greens and just volume-based foods that fill up your stomach but aren't very calorie dense, then you end up feeling a bit fuller from that expansion of your stomach. If you're eating really calorie dense processed foods that dissolve really easily and don't have these cellulose and starches that don't dissolve right away and fill up your stomach, but instead they just go straight into solution and absorb into your bloodstream, then you miss a bit of that and you can keep eating. So maybe you could get like 1,000 calories from a big soda, but getting 1,000 calories from eating kale, for example, you'd feel so full there'd be kale coming out of every hole in your body. So going back to berberine can help enhance the secretion of GLP-1. So maybe you don't have this response after food, or maybe you're eating some foods that aren't filling you up so much physically. You should probably just change that, by the way. Don't eat so many processed foods. Eat things that will actually physically fill you up too. Throw some kale in there. There's also some vitamin K and resistant starches that act as prebiotics. There's great stuff to be found in leafy greens like that, or just things that fill you up. But if you're not doing that, or even if you're doing that and you're still really hungry and you want to have this extra insurance there that you will get full, then taking berberine before a meal is a great idea, because it enhances that GLP-1 secretion and that makes you feel full. And a lot of current weight loss based strategies are based around GLP-1, and it's something that came up in the last couple of years, and especially in the last 2 years or so. And the main one that's really popular now, it starts with an O and it rhymes with AMPK or something like that. We won't talk about that very long. You probably know what I'm talking about. Very popular. It's a GLP-1 agonist. Here you're actually increasing the secretion of GLP-1. That's really interesting, and it's an effect that a lot of people are talking about now. And that's why I was saying with our experiment earlier today, with the small amount of lunch that we ate compared to we'd normally probably eat 2 to 3 times as much, I still felt as full almost from a meal that was twice as much. So that's really good. Beyond that, GLP-1 activates certain pathways that increase insulin production and insulin release, but only under the conditions of glucose being present. So if glucose is present, things have to get metabolized. GLP-1 ensures that you have more insulin sensitivity, more insulin's being released, that glucose is being taken care of better. So just for overall metabolic enhancement, GLP-1 going up is a really good thing, and berberine does it. So that's great. And now we kind of have to get to how is it doing it? And there's a few ways in which it can do it. One of those ways, it gets absorbed into your bloodstream and it goes throughout your body, and it affects a bunch of different enzyme systems, and you have increases in GLP-1. But on the other hand, if you look at certain gut microbacteria, then you see that certain ones can actually enhance GLP-1 production. And one of those is Akkermansia muciniphila. So it's a bacteria that feeds specifically on the mucin in our stomach. So just the mucus lining in our stomach. It feeds on it like other bacteria would on a sugar or on a protein or on a lipid. These bacteria, the Akkermansia muciniphila, this is also where the name comes from, muciniphilia, they can sustain themselves on mucin, also has the ability to increase GLP-1 secretions. And interestingly enough, berberine has the ability to act as a prebiotic specifically for Akkermansia muciniphilia. So a lot of those metabolic benefits might also be coming simply from berberine acting as a really unique prebiotic. And it's unique in the sense that berberine enhances the secretions of mucin. So it basically creates the food source for the Akkermansia muciniphilia. And that then has a positive overall effect on glucose metabolism, satiety, all of that. Also on overall protection of our stomach, because when that mucin gets degraded, it also signals to make more mucin. So you have more of that mucilage in your stomach and in your intestinal lining, which is really good. So it has gastroprotective effects. And this is maybe why bioavailability doesn't matter that much. So when you take the Berberine Silymarin, the Silymarin is in there to enhance bioavailability, by the way. So there is a bioavailability strategy going on there. One of those is that Silymarin can block something called P-glycoprotein. It's like a pump that when a compound gets absorbed through your intestinal lining, for example, P-glycoprotein, also called PGP, can grab onto that compound and efflux it. So it can basically take it and bounce it. It's like a bouncer at a club. If you make it in, you get a little bit too drunk, you get bounced. It's the same thing here. And Silymarin helps block that bouncer. It shuts off P-glycoprotein, so when the berberine gets absorbed, it doesn't get effluxed. It can actually get absorbed. So there is some bioavailability enhancement going on there. But it's not as much as, for example, the Phytosome. So what that means is that you then have a hyperlocalized effect. So if you, for example, just want to have berberine in your gastrointestinal system, going for a lower bioavailability berberine is actually beneficial, because then it can have more of an effect on, for example, those Akkermansia muciniphilia bacteria.
Would people who are looking for just the glucose metabolism benefits and not the nootropic benefits want to go for a lower bioavailability berberine?
No, then go for the Phytosome. I think in general, if you're wanting to explore the effects that are not related to the gut microbiome, you want to take the one that absorbs into your blood better.
Yes.
And that's the Phytosome.
Okay.
So the nootropic effects, you have to get it into your brain. Then you want to go for the Phytosome. It's going to have a more nootropic effect. The Berberine Silymarin might have a more localized effect, might have a better effect on your overall gut microbiome, and that's great for most people, but not for everyone. And this is where things get interesting, and if you're really interested in this concept, go watch our podcast that we did with Mr. Happy, Joshua. Joshua talks quite a bit in our podcast episode about biofilms and biofilm disruptors. So to give a quick recap on that, if you go into our gastrointestinal system and you want to see where those bacteria are hanging out, some good, some bad, they're usually hiding behind biofilms. So biofilms, a good example, if you've ever come across a SCOBY, like if you've seen kombucha fermentation, there's this thing called a SCOBY that floats on the top. It's a biofilm. So the bacteria, they clump together and they start producing cellulose, and it becomes this cellulose raft, and the bacteria can live inside of the cellulose. But that happens in our body too. So on the walls of our gastrointestinal system, these bacterial colonies can settle down and can build these biofilm cities almost. And this is, even in the scientific world, the biofilms are described as cities for bacteria. They go, they colonize it, they build it up, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then sometimes it gets disrupted, and then all of those bacteria and their bacterial metabolites, sometimes good, sometimes bad though, are released. So if you have a bunch of bad bacteria hiding out throughout your gastrointestinal system, hiding away from your immune system and all the detection mechanisms by living in this tightly controlled biofilm, then you're totally good, but you're harboring all of these bad bacteria. Now you take something that disrupts those biofilms, like berberine, like lion's mane, as we talked about with Joshua, and those potentially bad bacteria can now become liberated and can produce a not so pleasant effect, whether that is gastrointestinal distress, inflammation, a drop in mood. You see it happen quite a bit with certain people, and I think especially in our day-to-day life, we're eating a lot of processed foods. Processed foods are probably not so good for your gut microbiome. We're maybe not consuming as many probiotic type of foods. Our we have gut dysbiosis. It's not going great in the gut. We might have these bacteria, these bad bacteria hiding from detection systems. And when that gets liberated, we can have some diarrhea or gastrointestinal upset. And you see this happen with berberine. Some people feel great on it. Some people, when they first start taking it, they can feel nauseous, they can have diarrhea. And part of this likely is because of the biofilm disrupting abilities. Mm-hmm. So it's a good thing to keep in mind if you take berberine and you feel a bit off, that's maybe what's going on. The Phytosome doesn't produce that as much. So it's optimized for being better for people who might have a sensitive stomach, sensitive gastrointestinal system, or in other words, maybe people who have a lot of bad bacteria hiding out behind biofilms. You might want to slow that process down a little bit rather than just getting this huge release of these bacteria and maybe their bacterial metabolites. So something to think about. However, in a healthy person, that shouldn't be happening. So if berberine does make you feel bad in that kind of way, maybe get that checked out too.
It's something to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also really interesting to consider, like we talk about with the standardization of extracts, while the phytosome isn't going to change the strength of the extract, the phytosome is going to basically have more effects on your mental state and your general mood, your general health, whereas the Silymarin berberine is going to have more of a localized effect, specifically in the gut. So another thing to consider is if you're taking a lot of different mushroom supplements and you don't want to add on to that potential disruption of biofilms or release.
Or you do. Because
or you do.
Here's one thing. If you're not having issues with it, or you're having a little bit of an issue with it, and then it resolves, if you keep taking berberine or you keep taking some of these mushrooms, they prevent these biofilms from forming. So that's good. We basically don't want these big biofilms to form that are harboring a bunch of bacteria. So if you can take it in a prophylactic manner, where you're preventing these biofilms from forming, that's a good thing. So, and I'm sure if we would ask Joshua, he would say, pile it all on. Take all of the biofilm disruptors. Mm-hmm. That's maybe also a little bit extreme, so do keep that in mind. But if you're feeling any sort of gastrointestinal distress, maybe that's where it's coming from.
Yeah. Something to really keep note of. And then also to consider why the bioavailability issue is not necessarily an issue. It's just a matter of what kind of benefit you're looking for from berberine as a supplement.
Yeah, and that's a great way to sum it up. And to go a little bit more into detail there, if we look now at berberine, if enhancing the amount of Akkermansia muciniphila bacteria, which can increase GLP1 secretions, then do we even need to absorb berberine? And the answer is, to a certain extent, no. Because if you can just have it in the gut and it doesn't need to absorb, and it's already increasing GLP1 activity, maybe that's where that GLP1 portion is coming from. It's not maybe coming from a different mechanism. And this is where it gets really hard in scientific research too, because you can study one thing and say, okay, we give berberine to humans, to animal models, to cell models, and we see that it's producing now higher amounts of GLP1. But is that because it's absorbing and activating something like AMPK or other enzyme systems, or is it because it's having an effect on the gut microbiome and the gut-brain axis? This is something we're still learning a lot about. For example, that Akkermansia muciniphila bacteria we keep talking about was only discovered in 2003 or 2004 in the Netherlands, which makes me quite excited. But it means we know about it for about 20 years. There's not a huge amount of research on it, but we are starting to see that people who have very low amounts of Akkermansia muciniphilia have harder times controlling their glucose levels, and people with higher levels have an easier time controlling their glucose levels and staying slimmer. And you hear about this a lot, that probiotics can help you lose weight and all of this, and there might be some truth to that. And to dig into that Akkermansia bacteria a little bit more, the more Akkermansia you have, the more thermogenesis you're experiencing too. So this is something we talked about in the black ginger episode, and similarly to what black ginger is doing, and maybe that's also coming through a gastrointestinal gut microbiome mechanism, but berberine or Akkermansia can enhance uncoupling protein, UCP1 levels, which allows you to burn more fat in brown adipose tissue, which then produces heat. So that's thermogenesis. And it's interesting that Akkermansia can do that. So a bacteria that we can feed with berberine can do that. And there's so much research interest in this Akkermansia that it's now actually being pasteurized. So you can kill the Akkermansia bacteria through pasteurization, administer it to people, and it still produces those effects. So it's likely producing some secondary metabolites that might still be in there that have a positive effect. And in fact, one of those is a short-chain fatty acid. So a lot of bacteria have the ability to produce short-chain fatty acids, and some of those, like butyrate or propionate, specifically in berberine's case, are really good at enhancing metabolic function. So that's part of what's going on here too.
So we've gone in a few different directions, and it's really amazing to just hear in conversation how all of this is connected. But we started by talking about berberine's effect on, repeat it for me one more time, the acronym. What is, how do you say it? What's the thing that it's releasing? The G...
Oh, GLP1.
GLP1, yes, GLP1.
Glucagon-like peptide.
Yes. Okay. So we started by talking about this, that berberine is going to help us release more of this peptide when we eat, right?
Yes.
But then we also started talking about the way that berberine is going to help us break down different mucus, work on getting rid of these bad bacteria, and then letting this good bacteria flourish, right?
Yeah, so that's one thing I didn't mention. It's a biofilm disruptor and it's an antibacterial. So it can get those bad bacteria out, it can kill them, and it can increase the diversity of the good bacteria. For example, Akkermansia, but also a few different ones. So it's good for basically remodeling the gut. This might also cause some people issues, which is probably why some side effects include diarrhea, because it's just releasing. Here's a good example, actually. I was just thinking about this, and while I was doing research about this, curcumin produces the same effect as berberine on the biofilm disruption. So I know someone who ate a piece of cheese that was infected with a bad bacteria, unfortunately. They had a bunch of diarrhea, like really, really bad. They got antibiotics, and that helped a little bit. It also made it worse. We know how that goes. But then things seemed to stabilize a little bit. And then this person took turmeric supplements, curcumin, specifically Longvita, but then also a couple of drinks, like a turmeric shake and things like that. And every time this person had Longvita or a product that contained some sort of turmeric, this diarrhea would flare up again. And it's probably because of the biofilm disruption. And now, after spacing it out a little bit and taking a little bit of curcumin here and a little bit of curcumin there when their knee was flaring up a bit, it worked so well for controlling the knee pain, they thought, okay, I'm going to just take some of this curcumin, maybe take it for 2 days, and maybe then I won't have issues. And in the beginning, there was a little bit of diarrhea here and there, but now I think this person is taking it every day again without issues. So if curcumin is acting as a really good biofilm disruptor, this makes sense. Same thing with berberine. Again, this is maybe where some of those side effects are coming from.
And this is a quick little note for anyone who has reached out to Nootropics Depot's customer support at any point in time to ask questions about gastrointestinal upset. This is something really interesting to keep in mind. We recently learned about the importance of biofilms on the podcast with Joshua, but there is certainly a lot more going on with biofilms in our body than Emil and I are even aware of, and probably a lot of you. So if this is something that you experience with 1 or 2 supplements, but it's not something that you notice like in your everyday life, there could be something to the biofilm activity of that particular supplement, and it's something to keep in mind or do a little bit more research on for yourself.
Yeah, if you're having gastrointestinal symptoms, just look up, is what I'm taking a biofilm disruptor? And maybe ChatGPT is a very good tool for that. Just ask it, is XYZ a biofilm disruptor? And it might say, yeah, it's a biofilm disruptor. And then you may know, okay, there's something not totally right in my gastrointestinal system. And that's the problem that I had with this person trying to figure out why they were having this issue. Because previous to the cheese incident, they were taking curcumin for years, Longvita for years, no issues, really helped with the knee pain. But then the cheese incident happened, the antibiotics happened, a period of diarrhea happened, a period of stabilization happened, and then a period of that diarrhea coming back every time they took curcumin happened, and then eventually it all went away after a couple of years. But it just goes to show how good these bacteria probably are at hiding out, staying dormant. And you see this happening a lot where people get infected with some sort of bacteria, it goes away, it's treated, and then it ends up coming back. Could be this biofilm thing. There's a lot of research going into it. And again, check out Joshua and the episode. There's some more information there. I think this is really interesting and affects probably a lot of supplements that we take. And I think just generally, the gut microbiome research is booming currently. I'm very interested in it, so you hear us talking about it quite a bit. But there's definitely something to consider there with berberine, with curcumin. Cyanidin-3 glucoside also has really good gut microbiome modulating effects. We have a lot of customers who've had lifelong issues with their gastrointestinal system, and now they're on cyanidin-3 glucoside, and it's all but gone away. So clearly there's a big gut microbiome portion to a lot of these glucose metabolizing supplements. And I wish I could say the name. There's also another very famous one. Berberine seems to mimic the activities of this specific compound that are used clinically. And that compound also increases the amount of Akkermansia muciniphilia. So a very similar effect to berberine. So there seems to be a lot of overlaps there. So even with things that are being used clinically, there seems to be some Akkermansia modulating activity. So it's really interesting. Also, Akkermansia is just good for overall lipid metabolism, glucose metabolism, good for insulin sensitivity. So it seems like a lot of these benefits that are associated with berberine could be coming from this specific bacteria and berberine's specific effect at enhancing mucin secretions. So very interesting for gastrointestinal function.
Amazing and really cool, because we have talked about the ways that the berberine is actually working inside of our bodies, and we talked a little bit about how berberine is going to help us stay full and process that glucose. But is there anything else to touch on in terms of the weight loss benefits and the satiation benefits of berberine?
Yeah, so once berberine makes it into your circulation, and now we're looking at more direct effects on actual enzyme systems or receptors, there's a lot to explore there. So one of those is that berberine is a good activator of AMPK. This is something we've talked about also with black ginger, because it also activates AMPK, and with cyanidin-3 glucoside, because it activates AMPK. A lot of the flavonoids that we sell, like hesperidin, are good at activating AMPK. And so is exercise. So if you exercise, AMPK gets activated. If you take a cold plunge, AMPK gets activated. If you fast, AMPK gets activated. So AMPK activation is very interesting from a metabolic standpoint. Clearly also an important thing for just enhancing our overall health, because when you exercise or you fast or you restrict your calories, AMPK activation goes up, but you can also do it with berberine. And again, I think this is really important to touch on. And weight loss is something that has to come from you. So you can take berberine and you can keep eating the same amount of food that you do and exercise in the same way, but it's just not going to affect you that much if you're not changing your habits. And you see this in certain studies. If you give berberine to people and they're not changing their habits, in a month's time they can lose like a kilo of weight. That's really not enough to make it significant. But if berberine is having an effect on your satiation, your appetite, And it's helping you enhance how you process glucose, how you break down glucose in your body, and stopping, for example, the production of glucose in your liver. This is a process called gluconeogenesis, and it's also something that berberine can inhibit. Then you can get more out of your lifestyle changes. And this is really important with supplements. Don't take this expecting that it's going to be wonderful and you're just going to sit behind your computer, keep typing away and not walking enough, getting in your car, driving around, eating fast food all day. It's not going to help. You're going to be in the same predicament. If you take berberine, it can help reduce your appetite, and that can make it easier to control the food intake. And I think that's a question we all need to ask ourselves, is if we're increasing in size rapidly, why are we increasing in size? Why are we taking in more calories? Are we not getting satiated? Okay, good. Now you have a tool. Take some berberine, you might get more satiated. Or maybe you need to switch up the foods you eat. Put a bit more kale in there. Eat some popcorn if you're looking for a snack, because it doesn't have a whole lot of calories and it kind of fills you up. Or some celery sticks. Things like that. Things that will fill you up. And then look at things like berberine to help you along in that journey. Very important to keep in mind. But if you're looking at overall metabolic health, AMPK activation, if you then exercise along with that, you can be synergistic. So we talk about synergism with taking multiple different plant compounds together, but you can also have synergy between what you're doing behaviorally and what you're taking, and that's the cheapest overall option. So if you want to enhance the AMPK activating effects of berberine, maybe also practice a little bit of fasting, or take a cold plunge every once in a while, or exercise a bit more. And when you combine those, then the effects can accumulate, and that's really good for overall metabolic function.
This sounds like we're getting to the end of the weight loss journey.
Almost. So yes,
okay.
we have then thermogenesis, we have a reduction in white or visceral adipose tissue, which is white adipose tissue. And for that, I want to quickly take a look at the Phytosome, this one. And Erica can now pull up a little table here. There's research from India showing how significant these reductions in visceral adipose tissue are. And after 30 days, it's 16%. And after 60 days, it's 22%. I hope I'm saying that right, but if I'm not, you should be seeing it here. That's really significant. So in just a month, you can lose potentially, with the right diet and exercise involved, you could lose 16% of your visceral adipose tissue, so your belly fat, basically, which, as we mentioned at the start of this podcast, is also important if you're looking at enhancing overall testosterone synthesis, enhancing your hormone profiles, because that visceral adipose tissue is very good at breaking down testosterone into estrogen, which is then going to feed into the overall problems of how your body looks, your body recomposition, and things like that. And I have to say, for myself, taking Systemax or Systange for quite a while, pregnenolone and DHEA, I always had, I think I never got it tested, but based on how I'm recovering, how I generally feel, my testosterone levels are probably good. But from a body recomposition standpoint, taking cyanidin 3-glucoside and black ginger for quite a while now, I'm leaner and I feel stronger, even though I'm exercising a similar amount, which is a good amount, but the two stacking together seem to have a really good effect. So again, if you're interested in Tangadali, Systange, all of those things, and you're a bit overweight, consider dropping some of that weight. It will probably make Tangadali work better. So that's more of the glucose, fat, and then we get to cholesterol. So cholesterol is also something that there's a lot of studies on this now with berberine, and berberine can reliably drop cholesterol levels quite good, and especially LDL. So there's an enzyme called PCKS9, and this enzyme has an effect on LDL levels. And when you block this enzyme, PCKS9, then you can clear out more LDL. This doesn't work in everyone. There is a subset of people who have not very active PCKS9, and in those people you see a very rapid reduction in LDL cholesterol when they take berberine. So you could be one of those people. If you have high LDL cholesterol, that's something you could potentially try and see what happens. But if you look at a lot of the research, berberine seems to be very specialized at controlling and balancing cholesterol levels, which is really interesting because that then has major impacts on our cardiovascular system, especially when you combine that with the GLP1 effects, the insulin sensitivity effects, the glucose processing, the blocking of gluconeogenesis, and all of these positive metabolic effects that berberine has. It's a very good way of controlling your overall metabolic picture, including cholesterol in that picture. Glucose processing, lipid processing, all of these, I think from a metabolic standpoint, berberine is then really interesting. From a gut microbiome perspective, it's also really interesting. And all of that coming together just makes it a good thing, I think, for a lot of us, especially if you like to eat some sweets here and there, to be taking berberine, because it can enhance how you handle the food that's coming in. Or there's some other supplements like black ginger and cyanidin-3 glucoside that can do that too, in a different manner.
Yes. But
berberine does some other stuff like that GLP1 effect. So, and the unique effect on the Akkermansia bacteria.
So we've been referencing cyanidin-3 glucoside and black ginger quite a bit in this podcast so far, and you might be wondering, just like I am, why I should look for berberine and why I should be taking berberine to help with these gut health issues and also with maintaining a healthy weight in comparison to cyanidin-3 glucoside or black ginger. What's really the benefit of berberine, and why am I going to reach for this one as opposed to the other ones, which have some good hormonal balancing and kind of strength building benefits?
Yeah. So cyanidin-3 glucoside is a little bit problematic for people who might have issues controlling how much food they're taking in, because cyanidin-3 glucoside for the first week or two can actually significantly increase your appetite. So this is good if you're trying to take in more calories, because you're then going to up the amount that you're exercising, and you want to make sure that that extra exercise and extra fuel is being turned into bigger and leaner muscles rather than being stored as fat. Then cyanidin-3 glucoside is great. If, however, you're quite overweight and you're wanting to look for something that will help you lose that weight, cyanidin-3 glucoside could be good later in your weight loss journey when you've learned how to control your appetite by yourself. Because there's, of course, also a big mental component to it. It's not a choice for everyone how much they eat, but I think everyone can develop the mental tools over time to say, I'm still hungry, but I'm not going to eat. And that's kind of where you have to get with something like berberine, making sure that you're having something that's going to help you, but you also have to get there mentally and say, no, I'm not going to go for that second serving of fries, for example.
This makes sense because when I first started taking cyanidin-3 glucoside, I noticed that it was certainly increasing my hunger, and at a certain point after taking it for about a month, that increase in hunger was so dramatic and kind of extreme that it was disrupting my everyday life to the point where I would be feeling just ravenous and like a little bit freaked out at a certain point of getting so hungry, and every time that I would eat, it was like really a feeding frenzy. And this was too much for me. This was kind of pushing me beyond my comfortable limits on a daily basis. I've since reintroduced cyanidin-3 glucoside back into my daily stack. I really like it. It increases my hunger, which is a good thing for me. I don't always respond to my own hunger signals. I'm not always as aware of them. So I really like this benefit, but thank you for clarifying this. This is a really good and important distinction to make why berberine might be a better fit for you than some of these other supplements that can still help with glucose metabolism, but not increase your hunger. And then can we also make the same comparison with black ginger as well?
Yeah, well, one thing also to mention with cyanidin-3 glucoside is that not everyone responds so well to the monoamine oxidase inhibiting effects. So it can be quite stimulating. and it can enhance the activity of other stimulants. So, for example, if you're on a bit of a thermogenic stack that contains a lot of caffeine, then again, sanidin 3-glucoside maybe not the best option because it's going to make those stimulants feel a lot stronger, which is maybe not what you want. So in that case, sanidin 3-glucoside is also not the right choice. And berberine would be, because berberine doesn't really do that. Although it is also acting as a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, but not as strongly in my overall experience. It is a little bit stimulating, I can feel that. Now I think that second dose is kicking in on top of the first dose. And I do also have to report, usually during the podcast, if I'm starting it with a bit of an appetite in the beginning, the level of focus required to say all of the things we're saying kind of reduces my appetite a little bit, I would say like 10%. But that initial little bit of hunger I had at the beginning is just eradicated. Like, I'm gonna have a very hard time eating after this.
Oh.
How about you?
My stomach just started growling.
Funny.
Although this happens in almost every single podcast.
Okay.
But I must say, compared to previous podcasts, my hunger isn't as extreme. But I really do have this, about the 45-minute mark, my stomach will start to gurgle a little bit. But one other reason for this, aside from being a little bit hungry, is just the fact that my stomach is active. And it definitely makes a little bit more noise than other people I've met. Like, I have a pretty...
But, like, is it growling or are you hungry?
Both.
Okay.
It's a little bit of both. I definitely noticed the stimulation effect, specifically in that it's making me talk faster. And this is not something that I experience with a whole lot of supplements. So, interesting. Perhaps berberine also helps a little bit with verbal fluency.
Yeah. And it could be a little bit stimulating. So again, if you're sensitive to stimulants, sanidin 3-glucoside, maybe not the best option. Berberine also maybe not the best option. And to be honest, black ginger probably also not the best option because it's also a bit stimulating. All of these metabolic activators are stimulating. They make you want to get up and move. It's kind of great.
But this is a really nice segue into talking about the nootropic effects of berberine, and specifically the mood boost effects of berberine.
Yeah, so when you're looking at the overall picture, the better your gut microbiome is, the better your mood usually is. Because those bacteria in your gut are responsible for producing a lot of the neurotransmitters that we need in our brain and other factors that are important to our central nervous system. Some of those being the short-chain fatty acids. So if you look, for example, at Systanch is also really good at increasing short-chain fatty acid output of our gut microbiome, and by that it produces a mood-elevating effect. Same thing here with berberine. You're increasing that Akkermansia, muciniphila bacteria, and that produces propionate and also butyrate, so you're getting some of those short-chain fatty acid effects there. And Akkermansia muciniphila also basically liberates from that mucin different food sources for other types of beneficial bacteria. So you're taking berberine as a prebiotic for Akkermansia, and then Akkermansia is producing prebiotics for other bacterial species. So it's increasing the overall gut microbiome diversity, and that could have a very good effect on your overall mood. So again, there's many different ways in which to enhance your gut microbiome, and berberine is one of those tools that you might want to use.
In the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned some specific neurotransmitters as well as SIRT1.
I didn't mention SIRT1, but SIRT1 is a part of it. I mentioned Sigma-1.
But
before we get to the actual neurotransmitters, I want to finish where I'm going with this, because all of these factors that we're talking about, glucose metabolism, visceral adipose tissue, cholesterol, all of these things, we see them as something that affects our body, not our mind. But if your glucose levels are all over the place, think of what happens when you eat a big carbohydrate-containing meal. You feel really tired. You have a lot of insulin release and things like that.
You feel happy also. It can. Well, perhaps maybe happy is not the right way to describe it.
Hang on. Before you get into what your state of happiness is, it's probably working for you because your metabolism works well. But not everyone. A lot of people, 70% of Americans, at least 30% of Americans, have extremely dysregulated metabolic function. For example, when you're obese or really overweight, your metabolic function is clearly not working well, and your insulin levels might be all over the place. So you're also not processing glucose as well as you maybe should. So if you take in a lot of carbohydrates, you might get really tired. Again, this is probably a way in which you can kind of diagnose that maybe something isn't going totally right in your metabolic function, or that you're not eating the right foods. But you shouldn't really be getting like coma level tired. Like a lot of people, oh, I'm in a food coma. I can barely keep my eyes open. And I saw it with a lot of my colleagues. We would go out for lunch. I would usually be feeling happy. Great. I ate something. I'm feeling great. But I'm also exercising a lot. But a lot of my other colleagues, when we ate really heavy carbohydrate foods, they'd get really sluggish, tired, not be able to focus. So that could be an issue in glucose metabolism. But if you think about that, feeling really tired as a response of your metabolic function, of the foods that you're taking in, if you're having that all day long, these weird ebbs and flows of energy levels, and every time you eat you get tired, or it impacts your sleep or whatnot, that's going to have a very negative overall effect on your mental health. So if you want to improve your mental health, your cognition, mental clarity, all of these things, it's important to have good metabolic function too, and to be at an appropriate weight, and to eat the appropriate foods, and to exercise enough. But berberine can play a role there too, because it's helping with the gut portion of that. It's helping with less gluconeogenesis in your liver, for example, and it's helping with insulin sensitivity and stabilizing insulin levels throughout the day. So that's really good for overall cognitive function, for mood. And now we're not even talking about the neurotransmitters yet. AMPK also plays a role there. Again, when we exercise, we generally feel cognitively better. We feel in a better mood. So things that mimic that, AMPK activators, probably make us feel better too. And that seems to be the case here. And we're still not talking about neurotransmitters here. So I think this is a really important thing to think about. When we think about nootropics, we think about mood, and we get this comment sometimes. Oh, you guys aren't selling real nootropics anymore? You're just selling metabolic enhancers. You're selling immune system regulators and things like that. Yes, if you're looking at it from a very simplistic view, a nootropic might affect one or two neurotransmitter systems, and that produces a very reliable effect. Great. But if your metabolism is a wreck, you can take all of the nootropic compounds in the world, and you'll probably not get to where you really want to be. You might get to where you really want to be if you enhance everything else in your life. Good sleep schedule, good food, being at a healthy weight, controlling glucose metabolism, cholesterol metabolism, all of these things. High cholesterol levels also negatively impact mood. So making sure all of these variables, these health variables, are dialed in is going to help. Again, too, if you're taking testosterone for its mood boosting abilities, but you also have a lot of visceral adipose tissue, then you're improving one thing and then another thing is suppressing that again. So making sure that everything is working as it should, and like Joshua also said on a recent podcast we did, you need exercise. Your whole body is craving exercise at every point in the day. It needs to be active. These systems need to get activated. These hormone systems need to get activated. It needs to be sensitive. We need to be sensitive to insulin, all of these things. Another thing, for example, if you look at some cognitive decline at later ages, it seems to also be related to insulin levels being dysregulated. So if we can improve that, we can improve cognitive function, which we've known for a while now. Better insulin sensitivity leads to better cognitive function, better mood, but also better anabolism. You can build muscle better if you're more sensitive to insulin, because it's also a bit anabolic. And then you have things like insulin, like growth factor, where insulin is of course important too. So the more sensitive you are to that system, the better. Berberine can help with that. And now we can talk about the neurotransmitters.
Yes. So, before, I had mentioned that you gave us a recap in the beginning of the podcast about neurotransmitters,
yeah,
and that SIRT1 is a part of this process.
No.
But
SIRT1 isn't.
Oh, well, you said SIRT1 was a part of it, but it's actually Sigma-1.
SIRT1 could... So SIRT1 is something we've talked about a lot too, which is probably why
I'm getting it confused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
SIRT1, berberine is activating SIRT1 too, and AMPK. A lot of things that activate AMPK also seem to enhance SIRT1 activity. This is something that a lot of people like David Sinclair have talked about for many years with things like resveratrol. And SIRT1 is also a major metabolic regulator. So good that you mention it. Berberine can have an effect there too, although it's not crazy strong compared to some other things, but there's some benefits there. And you can also see with people who have enhanced SIRT1 activity, you do sometimes see a mood boost and a cognition boost. But the real thing we want to be talking about here is Sigma-1, which sounds very similar. It's a very strange receptor. We know very little about it. It modulates how calcium fluxes around. So if you go back to our previous episode about black ginger, we also talk about calcium quite a bit, because calcium is one of the things that triggers neurotransmitter release. And if you look at Sigma-1 activation, you also see neurotransmitters go up. That's maybe also one of the reasons why when you give berberine to certain animals or even humans, you can see increases in neurotransmitter levels. Sigma-1 might be playing a role. But it's a bit of an elusive target. We haven't completely figured out what it is. It was discovered maybe 40 years ago or so and was thought to be an opioid receptor. Now we've discovered that it isn't. And it seems to float around a little bit, and it can activate and modulate different neurotransmitter systems. Either way, it's a bit of a holy grail target. We're always looking for Sigma-1 agonists to really explore what it's doing. And here we have a really good Sigma-1 agonist. So it's one that from day one when we started looking into Sigma-1 and it started getting more popular on Reddit, we kept pointing towards, hey, but look, berberine is a good activator of Sigma-1. And I think how we're feeling now, especially after that second dose, there is something unique. It's not stimulating like caffeine is. It's not stimulating like sanidin 3-glucoside is. It's a little bit more like black ginger, but a bit more pushy. And maybe if you're looking at that Sigma-1 calcium portion where it's influencing other neurotransmitter systems, that could be one of the ways that berberine is improving mood. But then you also seem to have increases in tryptophan hydroxylase and tyrosine hydroxylase. Those are two enzymes that can turn dietary tryptophan and L-tyrosine into their corresponding neurotransmitters, which are dopamine and serotonin. Not norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is also involved there because norepinephrine is made from dopamine. So if you're producing more dopamine, you're producing more norepinephrine. And that might be why you're also seeing increases in dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin when you're taking berberine. Could be because more is being synthesized. Could be because less is being broken down because it's also acting as a monoamine oxidase A inhibitor. Or it could be because it's acting on certain transporters. Berberine also seems to have an effect on the serotonin transporter and the norepinephrine transporter, or it could be the Sigma-1 mediated mechanism. So there's a lot going on the neurotransmitter, the monoamine front. A lot of people think monoamines are the most important thing for mood. I think they play a major role, but maybe even more important is neuroplasticity, and berberine also enhances neuroplasticity. So it can enhance the process of neurogenesis. It can enhance BDNF, GDNF levels. I'm not sure if it can increase NGF levels, but at least those two. So there's a neuroplasticity effect coupled with a monoamine increase. And I think in the case of berberine, there's a lot of other things that are better at doing that, potentially. But those things aren't as good at controlling glucose levels, aren't as good as controlling cholesterol levels. So with that in mind, berberine fills kind of a niche here where it's a metabolic enhancer, and it also has some effects on neurotransmitter levels, which could have an overall mood boosting, cognition enhancing effect. So that's really interesting. I do realize I just forgot to talk about why would I take black ginger over berberine or vice versa. One of the things that you might not like about black ginger and sanidin 3-glucoside is that it makes you quite warm. Berberine also does that a little bit because it's also a little bit thermogenic, but it's not as thermogenic as either black ginger or cyanidate 3-glucoside. And I had a bit of a theory about this the other day. We have quite a few people reporting, I feel like I'm burning up when I take cyanidate 3-glucoside and black ginger. And there's other people, like Erica and I, who notice just a little bit of warmth, but we're both pretty lean. And one of the things that cyanidate 3-glucoside and black ginger do is they convert white adipose tissue, the fat mass that you would see on yourself, converts it to brown adipose tissue, which is much more metabolically active, and that produces heat. So if you have a lot of white adipose tissue, maybe you're a bit overweight, then there is more white adipose tissue to convert to brown adipose tissue, and there's more possibility for more thermogenesis potentially to occur because you need fat mass for that. So more fat mass, more heat, potentially. So again with berberine, one reason why you wouldn't want to take cyanidate 3-glucoside at the beginning of your weight loss journey would be because it can enhance appetite. One reason you might not want to take black ginger at the beginning of your weight loss journey is because it can make you really hot if you have a lot of white adipose tissue. Berberine kind of falls in the middle there, so I think as a starting point, that's really good to start. It reduces your appetite, doesn't produce as much of a thermogenic effect, even though it does still for some people, but not as much as black ginger. And it has a really good overall effect on metabolic health and gut diversity, so I think that makes berberine a really interesting option.
Absolutely.
And it makes berberine a really interesting option for the overall cognitive package, where you're just enhancing all of these basic features, blood flow, all of that. It's really important. We're a well-oiled machine. If we have too much fat mass, we're also going to suffer in terms of mood going down or cognition going down. If we have less fat mass and we're more metabolically healthy, then we have less oxidation, we have less inflammation, all of these things that can have a positive overall effect on our cognitive function. So I think berberine was always an interesting one because it's one of the first things we were selling. It's been around for a really long time and people have always respected it and respected it as a nootropic too, even though maybe its most nootropic effects are the fact that it is a metabolic enhancer, and metabolic health is important for mental health too. I think it's interesting now, coming back maybe 10 years later, we're starting to realize that more and more, and now berberine is trending on TikTok. Berberine is trending on Instagram with young people like ourselves, even younger, which I think is really interesting, that people are now no longer interested in a quick fix, they're looking at a long-term fix. And that's where we'll kind of end this podcast too. Take it for a long time before reevaluating. You see with the enhanced bioavailability Phytosome, you have to take it 30 days for things to really start happening, and it gets even better after 60 days. So start taking berberine if you're interested in it. Do it 3 times a day. Start adjusting also how you're eating, how you're exercising, and all of that. And then give it a month or 2. And then see and reevaluate where you're at. You might have lost quite a bit of weight at that point. You might be in a better mood. You might be responding better to the foods that you eat. Your gastrointestinal system might feel better. And that might then be the push to get into some other metabolic activators like black ginger or cyanidate 3-glucoside to start stacking them. But long story short, it's a big journey, and berberine is a really good tool for that journey. But it is not a magic pill, so don't expect to take it and get slim. You still have to put in the work, but the work will be more rewarding.
One really interesting tidbit I want to leave before we finish the podcast is also for anyone who is sensitive to or wary of taking supplements that are going to have significant effects on the hormone system. Berberine can be a good starting point, something that can help you in terms of weight loss goals and also glucose metabolism, but it's not going to have such dramatic focus on the hormone system and things like estrogen and testosterone. So if that's something that you want to avoid, or if that's something that you're not interested in terms of the supplement that you're taking on a daily basis, berberine would be a really great option to still help managing your satiety and managing your weight loss journey or just fitness in general, but not getting into the hormonal side of things as much.
Yes.
So thanks so much for listening to this podcast episode. We really hope that you got some useful information from it and that you're curious about berberine and how it might fit into your daily stack, just like we are. And if you have any questions or comments that you want to leave us, subscribe, follow us, join our community on Reddit. Our Reddit is r/Nootropics Depot. You can also leave us a comment under the YouTube video as well as on Spotify. So there's lots of different ways to share your feedback about this episode and ideas for other things you might want to hear about in future In Search of Insight podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram as well, and all the links are going to be in the description on every streaming platform and on YouTube as always. And we just want to say thank you again, month after month. You are watching these podcasts, you're interacting with us, giving us really great feedback and tips for things that can make the podcast better, and also giving us ideas for ways that we can have more fun with the podcast in the future. So we really appreciate all of your listening and interaction, and we can't wait to film a new episode for you next month. So until then, we will say ta-ta for now. See ya!
See ya!